guys. Here I come. I'm gonna show up here in just a minute here. That's not what I want. Oh, take that off the camera. There we go. That's what I want. How are you guys doing tonight? Sorry I'm a few minutes late, but we're getting ready to go here. I was honestly prepping for how I was gonna run this tonight, and I just realized, man, we got a lot of stuff in this time period. So I'm gonna do my best to get through it all. I don't know if I'm gonna hit everything that we possibly covered over these past 4 weeks or something, but what I need to do is I'm just going to start going through it, and I'm going to rely on you guys for any questions and stuff you have. Caitlin, I see your message. I can't do anything about that right now. As long as I'm doing the broadcast, I can't do anything with Con. I probably just need to get in, and if you just try to sign up tonight, I still got to confirm you in, and so I can't do it right now, but as soon as we're done with this broadcast, and I'm sorry, I just saw your text now. I didn't even have my phone with me. So I will get it up and running as quick as I can. But like I was saying, I am going to try to cover everything I need to. And you guys ask me the questions you want to listen to, and then we'll just go from there. Now, see, Caitlin, I'm thinking about this, so I'm looking to see if I can get this up and running for you. So just give me a second, because if I don't, I'll forget later. Let me see. Sorry, guys. Talk amongst yourselves. No, it's not coming up. All right, you should be in there now. Okay. So anyway, here's where we're going to go. I'm going to just kind of start talking at the beginning like I normally do. I have a PowerPoint that actually has a lot of extra stuff on it, so if you see me breezing through it, I don't want you to panic. It's just kind of the nature of the beast. But when I said we got a lot to cover, we started talking about this stuff before Christmas break. So we're going all the way back to Grant's presidency and the conflicts and the problems that he had, and then we're coming all the way through Wilson's presidency. Now, granted, when we get to the progressive era, we're just talking about domestic issues of like Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson, so that's going to go real quick. But we've got a lot to go through, so I'm just going to go ahead and get started and just see how far we can get and how quickly we can get through this. I was looking at last year's review, and I spent an hour and a half doing that, and I really am going to try to avoid talking that much tonight. So anyway, we know the Gilded Age, what that means and everything like that. It's not the best time for America. It's good and it's bad. And so we're going to look at both sides as we go through this stuff tonight. The first thing we talked about going into this was the scandals that were in Grant's presidency. And when we look at his presidency, a lot of it was not really due to him, but the people he surrounded himself with. Some of the scandals you need to be familiar with is the Black Friday gold conspiracy between Jay Gould and Jim Fisk, where they tried to buy up all the gold on the market. That is going to lead to the Panic of 1873. Another scandal is going to be the Tweed Ring. That's when we're first introduced to political machines. And we know the Tweed Ring, Boss Tweed, there he is right there. And he was the political party leader of the Democrats in New York City, and they operated out of Tammany Hall. We talked about Thomas Nast, kind of a current or an early muckraker trying to expose Boss Tweed and the political machines for what they were. And like we know, the political machines were taking advantage of new immigrants coming into the country, trying to get their votes. They were, I don't want to say they were taking advantage, because let's be honest, they were doing a lot for the immigrants too. They were providing them housing, providing them jobs, providing, just whatever they needed. And in exchange, they were trying to get their votes. So, that's kind of what the Tweed Ring was doing. The benefits for the Tweed Ring is they were able to supplant politicians throughout the New York City government, and then they were able to manipulate different contracts. They were able to manipulate different positions where they could basically get kickbacks through everything they did. And we know that Tweed himself made millions as he was, leading this political machine in New York City. Again, here's more of Thomas Nast commercials, or I'm sorry, commercials, cartoons, and we talked about all those. Another big scandal during the Grant administration is going to be the Credit Mobilier scandal. Now, this is dealing with the railroads, and we're getting our first glimpse of corporations and the corruption within those corporations, as well as their relationship with government, and how they, both government and corporations, benefited from that relationship. So we see that in the Credit Mobilier scandal, we saw that this company was set up as a dummy corporation under the Union Pacific Railroad, and a lot of money is going to be kicked back to the railroad, through exorbitant costs and stuff like that, and it's going to go right directly into the coffers of the Credit Mobilier company. The officers, the owners of this company, are going to make millions, and the way they're going to keep this situation going is they're giving stock to congressmen and senators, and so they're benefiting as well. So you're seeing that corrupt relationship that's developing during the Gilded Age, like I said, between corporations and between governments. The Salary Grab Act. This was another one that happened during Grant's administration, when Congress decided to go ahead and pass, the salary grab, where they're going to get a raise, and through that raise, they're basically giving Grant, I think they gave, doubled his salary and gave themselves a 50% raise or something like that, but they made it retroactive for 2 years. So when that happened, obviously that's going to be a problem. Now, that's going to be changed. That's going to be voted out on the next Congress. And what we have now today is when Congress passes a raise for themselves, it doesn't take effect until the next election. So that's going to be a direct result of the Salary Grab Act. The whiskey ring fraud. This is the dealing with tax collectors on the excise tax of whiskey, not reporting all the whiskey that was being produced, and basically pocketing the extra money they were collecting. So another fraud, another corrupt situation during Grant's administration. And I know I'm blowing through all these, but these we talked about a lot in class, so just be familiar with the ideas here. Now, when we get into the industrial age, when we talk about this is something that is very beneficial for America, in the sense that we're going to see our industry grow. We're going to become an economic powerhouse. We're going to see our cities grow, our population grow, and this is kind of where we get that Gilded Age persona, because on the outside, things are looking fantastic. But on the inside, we have all that corruption we talked about. We have poor working conditions. We have slums. We have child labor. And so while there's a lot of good in the industrial age, there is an awful lot of bad in the industrial age as well. So we're going to look at some of that. After the Civil War, and I'm just going to bust through some of this, it's going to be the railroads that are really going to kick industry into high gear. Now, the railroads are going to, first the Transcontinental Railroad is going to be, built following the passage of the Pacific Railway Act of 1862. That's going to be a combination of the Central Pacific Railroad and the Union Pacific Railroad. Once the Transcontinental Railroad is going to be built, we're going to see the ability to take our goods throughout the country, especially the farmers in the West. They're going to rely heavily on these railroads. So they're probably like the catalyst to the absolute monumental growth that we will see in industry. The Supreme Court, the government, is going to help with industry as well. Make sure you look at some of those court cases that we looked at. Just be familiar with those, because one thing that the Supreme Court does is they actually declare that corporations are individuals. And so as an individual, a corporation now has protection under the 14th Amendment. Huge ruling during this time. So make sure you remember that one, that they do become recognized as an individual or as a person, thus getting the protection of the 14th Amendment. A lot of economic factors, that are going to affect it. I'm sorry, I skipped over that. The Bessemer-Kelly process is going to be introduced. Now, Andrew Carnegie is going to bring that over from England, and he's going to implement it here in the United States. And with that, he's going to have a new system of manufacturing steel. And this steel is going to be more lightweight. it's going to be stronger, and it's also going to be cheaper to manufacture, and they can make a lot more of it a lot quicker. This is going to be how Andrew Carnegie builds U.S. Steel to be one of the top corporations in the country at this time. Rockefeller, we know that Rockefeller is going to build Standard Oil. He is going to build it on the refining process of oil. Now, I'm not sure if I have a slide here, so I'm going to jump if I have to come back. The one thing I want you to remember here when we're talking about these corporate giants, make sure you know the difference between vertical and horizontal integration. Now, Carnegie operated his corporation with vertical integration, meaning he controlled all the different parts of production when it came to steel. I mean, all the way from manufacturing the steel to shipping the steel to selling it, he controlled all of it. Rockefeller, on the other hand, is going to use horizontal integration. And with horizontal integration, that's where you own all of one part of production. And in Rockefeller's case, he found a way to refine oil to get it to its finest level, and then he just controlled refining of oil in our country. Now, there's going to be relationships between the capitalists, the monopolists. For instance, Rockefeller is going to have a relationship with Vanderbilt when it comes to the trains, because Vanderbilt is going to ship his oil and stuff like that, and there was competition for stuff, but everything. But for the most part, these guys were building up their corporations on their own. One guy that I clicked off, I'm going to get back to him, that's J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan is going to be the bank's banker. He is a huge financier. He is going to play, a huge role, especially when we get to the 1890s, because he's actually going to bail out the United States when we hit that panic of 1893 and go into that depression during the 1890s. So these are the guys you need to know. What else about Morgan? Oh, Morgan also buys out U.S. Steel. He's going to purchase U.S. Steel from Andrew Carnegie and turn it into the first billion-dollar corporation in our country. So these are the guys you need to know and be familiar with. Philip Armour. I mean, I talked about this guy in class, the meatpacking industry. He was a leader there. Swift and the refrigerated lines of train cars. That's going to also revolutionize our country as far as consumerism, because we can now ship food and meats, across the country using these refrigerated cars. So, again, great inventions. I mean, I didn't even talk about the inventions during this time, the innovation, the telegraph, the telephone, the sewing machine. All of these new, products and new inventions are coming to the forefront, making life easier for the average American, giving us much more access to new goods and new products. And with, things like the refrigerated cars, we can now ship food and stuff further, with the Transcontinental Railroad. So all of that's in play at once. And I know I'm trying not to go too fast, but it's just there's just so much going on at once. If you remember, in my classroom, I had that timeline with all three periods going. And so you have, while Carnegie is building U.S. Steel, you're still having the battles for Native American land in the West and stuff like that. So just keep that in mind, that there's a whole lot of things happening all at once in America. Pillsbury, they got their start then too. So, all right, unions. With corporations, with factories, we see the rise of unions. The very first union is going to be the National Labor Union, which comes out in 1866. Not really well known. And remember, unions in the beginning didn't have a lot of power. It was just the beginning of organization. Employees realized that, they were at the pleasure of the men that they worked for. And if you worked in a factory, there was no protection of your job. There was no protection of your wages. There was no, anybody fighting for safe working conditions or anything like that. So if you got hurt on the job, you'd more than likely be fired and wouldn't be able to go back to work. If the corporation, the factories started losing money, they would just cut your wages, and you would either have to deal with it or you'd leave and they'd find someone else to work. So that's the reason why unions started to come about, is the workers started to come together and say, maybe if we all band together, we'll have the power to bargain with these factory owners. Didn't quite work out at the beginning, but we're going to see, different union groups come up. Now, one of the, the one that saw a little bit success was going to be the Knights of Labor. They're going to come out in 1869. What happens to the Knights of Labor, though, is we're going to have the Haymarket Square riot in Chicago. That's going to result in a police officer being killed when an anarchist throws a bomb into the middle of their peaceful demonstration. Well, even though it wasn't the Knights of Labor who instigated that attack, they're going to be blamed for it. So we're going to see the Knights of Labor kind of disappear into, non-existence. Probably the most famous labor union is going to be the American Federation of Labor. It's going to be started by Samuel Gompers in 1886. The AFL is still around today. It's merged with the CIO, but this is the labor union. Remember, this one was based on skilled workers. You had to have a skill before they would let you in the union. They were not they were not an equal unit. They didn't promote equality. Basically, it was skilled white men who were initially allowed into this union. The International Workers of the World, that's going to be the one that's going to be introduced by Eugene Debs in 1905. We talked about with all the new immigrants coming into the country during the Gilded Age, there is this wave of socialists coming in, and that's who Eugene Debs was. He was a socialist. The IWW is going to start that. And Debs and the IWW, different from the AFL because they welcomed everybody into their union, whether you were skilled or unskilled, whether you've been on the job for a day or you've been on the job for 20 years, you were welcome into their union. When we look at the results of the unions, how did they deal with unfair working conditions? How did they deal with low wages? How did they deal with, injury on the job? And it was strikes. That's really the only tool they had was just to walk off the job, because they figured if we walk off the job, the corporation's not making any money. And they'll have to talk to us. But it never really worked out that way because we saw the corporations, the businesses had their own tools to use. They would use yellow dog contracts or scabs, or a worst case scenario, they would bring the Pinkerton detectives in. And we saw that especially with the Homestead strike in, I think, 1882. I don't know if I have a slide on that, but I believe it was 1882 for the Homestead strike. And what happened there was the strikers barricaded themselves in the Homestead steel factory in Homestead, Pennsylvania. Now, this is one of Andrew Carnegie's factories. They're going to barricade themselves in, and oh my gosh, I can't remember the guy's name who was the manager. I can see his face, but basically he is going to order the Pinkertons to come in. They are going to basically get into a fight, and people are going to be killed. People are going to be injured. And it's eventually going to happen where the federal government and the state government is going to have to send troops in to break this strike up. In the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, it was not uncommon for the federal government to get involved with strikes. We saw that in 1877 with the Great Railroad Strike, when Rutherford B. Hayes, in order to get the railroad running again, is going to send federal troops in to break up that strike. That's going to set a precedent, and we're going to see this several times with different strikes when the federal government or the president is going to use his power as the commander-in-chief to break up strikes. Okay? Like I said, Henry Clay Frick. Yeah, thank you, Saul. Frick was the manager of the Homestead Steel Mill, and he is the one. I mean, honestly, what Carnegie wanted to do, he wanted a lockout. He just wanted to lock the doors and wait the strikers out. But Frick wanted to get people back to work, and so that's when he brought in the Pinkertons, and that's where it got ugly. So thank you guys, I appreciate that. I don't know, Saul's name, Saul popped up first, Quentin. I'm not sure who was in there first, but, it's pretty close. I'm going to give you the guys the tie. Okay, new immigrants. New immigrants coming in. Now, we talked about the difference between the old immigrants and the new immigrants. The old immigrants, that's going to be back early 1800s, the Irish, the Germans, and that group. But the new immigrants, Western European is old immigrants. The new immigrants are going to come from Eastern Europe and Southern Europe. So we're talking Italy and Greece and Russia and Poland and the Czech Republic and places like that. We're also going to be having, what falls under the new immigrants is the Chinese coming from Asia, and they actually came over from the West Coast to help build the railroads. This new group of immigrants coming in is, number one, they're coming in for work because we have a lot of work in our country at this time. And what we're going to see happen is they're going to compete with Americans for jobs. Many of them are willing to break strikes. Many of them are willing to work as scabs because they just need to feed their families. And so you're going to see Americans push for restrictions on immigrants. The very first one we're going to see is the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, in which we basically stopped immigration of Chinese from coming in our country. It wasn't stopped completely. I think we allowed like maybe 100 in every year, but essentially it was stopped. We talked also about how later we're going to see an agreement with Japan in 1914. Was it 1914? No, it was earlier than that. 1907, I believe. I don't know. But anyway, we're going to see the gentleman's agreement where Japan is agreeing to stop Japanese immigrants from coming here, from even leaving Japan. And in exchange, what we'll do is the Japanese Americans who are living here will make sure they get the same protections under the law as other Americans. So we have those. That's going to happen. With all these new immigrants coming in, with all these new jobs, with all these new factories being built because of the steel and because of, consumerism and all this other stuff, urbanization is going to take hold in our country. And you're going to see the majority of Americans, at some point we're going to get to the point where more Americans live in the cities than live out in the farm areas or the agrarian areas. Basically, what's happening during this time is America is going from an agrarian-based economy to now they're going to an urban-based economy. With all these immigrants coming in, with all these Americans moving to cities, urbanization is going to become both a problem and a I guess it's going to become a fact of life, but there's a lot of problems tied to urbanization. And one of the biggest, names that is going to point that out is going to be Jacob Riis. He is going to show what life is like living in the cities, living in the slums, living in what we called dumbbell tenements. You see, most of these immigrants or most of these people moving to the city, they couldn't afford, a nice apartment or anything like that. So they started building these tenements where you could squeeze one whole family into a room and get a whole lot of people into these buildings that were put up very quickly. Most of them, or none of them, they don't have plumbing. Some of them don't have heat. They're infested with rats. They're infested with germs. They're infested with garbage, and people are living in this, and that's what's going on in our cities during this time period. Yeah, we have these beautiful new buildings going up that were built like by Louis Sullivan and people like that, and what we call the precursors to the skyscrapers we see today. But Jacob Riis took us down to the streets and showed us what life was like at ground level. It's kind of like Google Earth Street View, if you will. And so that's what he did in his book, How the Other Half Lives. Another muckraker you should be familiar with. Again, political machines are a big part of this in New York City. Tammany Hall's already existed, but we still have other political machines going on. How many of the new immigrants took on an agricultural? Riley, not many, honestly. The majority of those immigrants coming in, the new immigrants, are not going to have many skills. Like when we saw like the Germans and the Irish come in with old immigration, they had farming backgrounds. That's that's what they were coming to do for the land and everything like that. Little bit different here. The immigrants are coming here. They don't have much. It's not like they're coming with a lot of financial backing. So they're kind of, majority of them are limited to the urban areas so they can get jobs and provide for their families. Now, do some of them want to leave the city and go into farming and get land? Absolutely. But it's more difficult than you would think. So that's a great question because, in all honesty, we don't really think about that. But yeah, when they're getting off those boats, especially like in New York and stuff, they just go right into the city, get involved with the ward bosses who ran the local political offices, and they're called ward bosses, and they would set them up right then and there with jobs, places to live, all that other stuff. All right, so with the political machines, with all the graft and everything that was going on, we are going to see a move in the early 1880s for civil service reform. You had, up until this point, and you saw this with President Grant's administration, you saw it, in other administrations, this political patronage where your supporters are getting jobs based on just because they either help pay for your election, or they just got the people out to vote, but they got, in exchange for their work, they got a job. Well, what's going to start happening is there's going to be a push for civil service reform, meaning we want only qualified people in our government. We don't want these political machines to have all this power throughout our country. And unfortunately, it's going to take the assassination of a president before that actually happens. That's going to be the assassination of Garfield. And when he's assassinated, Chester Arthur is going to take his place, and they are going to pass the Pendleton Act. That's one of these acts that you absolutely need to know. The Pendleton Act basically sets standards for who could be hired within the government, and you had to be qualified in order to get the job. Many government jobs were tied to an exam that you had to pass to prove your qualifications. So this is also going on. So you can kind of see right in the middle of the Gilded Age that we're starting to see movement towards a correction, towards cleaning up some of the mistakes we have. And the Pendleton Act is looking at the corruption within government. So just keep that in mind. Tariffs were a huge debatable item throughout this time period. Most presidents, it was primarily Republicans who were, who had control of the administration during this time, and they supported high tariffs in order to build American business. And so we're going to see tariff after tariff passed. I think the highest one will be in 1890. That will be the McKinley tariff, and that one is going to set taxes on foreign goods at like 48%. So this is going to play a key role for a number of groups, but in the cities, it's building up American business. The people who were in the positions because of political patronage, Tarun, over time, they're just going to be replaced. They're not going to step in and just start firing them, but they are going to start cleaning house. And so as new administrations come in, as new mayors come in, stuff like that, they're going to want their own people in there, but they're going to have to go through the Pendleton Act in order to get hired at that point. So that's basically, it's just going to be it's going to be just a slow weeding out of those who weren't qualified and replacing them with those who are. So a gradual changeover is what the word I was looking for. The Panic of 1893. We had a lot of problems, with our currency coming out of the Civil War. There was a push for greenbacks. You had farmers who were pushing for bimetallism. They wanted silver because they needed to get loans. A lot's going to happen that's going to lead to the Panic of 1893. From 1870 to about 1890, our economy was growing at leaps and bounds. And it was, the high of the high, because our wage gap was huge between the rich and the poor. And when we get to 1893, we're going to see ourselves with a shortage of gold. This was right after there was the government, the Sherman Silver Purchase Act, when the government started purchasing silver. And then they also had the Bland-Allison Act, where they were purchasing silver. And what that did was that overvalued silver. And we talked about that in class, and I don't want to get into the whole discussion about the economics and everything. But remember, I told you that as values or as interest rates go up, inflation goes up, and because of that, it's easier to get loans, all this other stuff. We talked about all that in class, but basically the end result was we had a shortage of gold in our country. And I think we got below $100,000 in our gold reserves because people had been buying silver, and at a cheaper rate, like directly from the miners, selling their silver on the exchange for an overinflated value, and then actually buying gold and replacing that gold with the money they made from the silver. And so they're just going to start buying up all the old gold reserves. That's going to lead to an economic depression. This depression is going to last several years. We're going to see unemployment reach near 20%. So 1/5 of our country was unemployed. And there's going to be this push for, this free silver and bimetallism. Now, even though we had this overvalue of silver, it helped the farmers a lot when the government was producing silver and buying silver, because they were able to get loans, they were able to pay back their loans, and stuff like that. So you're going to have this push for bimetallism. But that's, kind of honestly one of, that's not going to be the answer we need. The answer we needed to get out of the Depression was J.P. Morgan. He ended up loaning the American government $65 million in gold. Where he kept it, I don't know. But, he had it. So, he saved us and got us out of that. But Republicans and Democrats are definitely split. What should we have? Should we just have gold, or should we just have silver, or should we have both? And then how do you find the balance in that? Because you had some people saying we want unlimited coinage of silver. Some say no, coin it at a 16-to-1 ratio. And if you remember correctly in that graph I showed you, it's the government's responsibility to control the money supply. And so we're trying to figure out the best way to do all this. This is going to see the rise of the populist movement in our country. And I'm going to come back to the populist movement here in a little bit. But they favored bimetallism. And so they're the ones who are going to be pushing for that. And because the populists were basically created based on the organization of farmers in our country. I just explained why. So make sure you know William Jennings Bryan and the Cross of Gold speech, where he says that he is going to, not let the gold standard be this crown of thorns on the worker's head. So he's also pushing for bimetallism. He is going to campaign for that in the election of 1896. There's a cartoon that's showing, the 16-to-1 ratio he wanted to see come in. I'm gonna, if you give me just a second here, I'm going to put on, I think I have a different video I want you, or not video, but a different PowerPoint I want you guys to see. So let me do a couple changes here. Let me see, is it this one? It's not that one. No. Give me just a second here. Let me find it. Yeah, this is what I want to bring up. Okay, so. I don't know if you guys have noticed while I'm killing some time here doing this, I don't know if the wind's blowing outside, that cold front's moving in, so, everyone, I don't know if you guys are excited, but it's a-coming, so it's going to be cold tomorrow. You see me changing my screen, I'm sorry about all this. There we go, okay. Slideshow. And this should do it. It's not the one I wanted. That's the one I want. There we go. Okay. Got it. All right. So I want to take a minute here, and I want to kind of slow down and talk about the Populist Party and what they did. Raquel, you're excited for the cold? I actually am too. I prefer cold weather. Well, I don't prefer cold weather. I like cold weather in the wintertime. This 80 degrees today was just too much. All right. So let's talk about the populist movement. The populist movement got its start in the 1890s, but it actually started a lot sooner than that. It actually started with the formation of what was called the Grange, and the Grange was an alliance of, or not an alliance. The Grange was an organization of farmers who came together trying to, build a cooperation amongst all of them to fight low prices and high rates on the rail lines. And they thought if they all came together, then that would give them more power to negotiate better prices. It's not going to give them exactly what they wanted, and we're going to see that from the Grange, we're going to see the alliance movement come in. And the alliance movement, what's interesting is that all of these are open to minorities. So you have the the National Colored Farmers Alliance is going to come together with all this. You're going to have, I'm sorry guys, my dogs are bringing in trash from outside. The National Women's Alliance are going to be part of this. And so this is going to be a movement across our country for our farmers. Now, the National Grange is going to actually fight on behalf of the farmers with regards to different types of the Supreme Court cases. Hang on just a second. Gilligan. Hang on, guys. I got to get something out. Every time I do this, he's chewing something that's going to kill him. So I got to go save him. Hang on. There you go. I saved him. It's all good. All right. So the National Grange is going to fight on behalf of farmers, and there's going to be several key cases that go to the Supreme Court. Munn versus Illinois is going to regulate the grain storage rates. Wabash versus Illinois, the states cannot regulate interstate railroad acts. See, what happened here is the Grange or the alliances are going to work with state governments, and the state governments are actually going to pass some laws to help them out. And with regards to Munn versus Illinois, what the state of Illinois did was they put a ceiling on what could be charged for storing grain in different, storage areas and stuff. Munn is going to sue and say, well, the state does not have the power to do that. And the Supreme Court is going to say, yeah, they absolutely do, because states regulate intrastate trade. Now, in Wabash versus Illinois, they said that states can regulate interstate rate or they can regulate railroad rates within their state, but if a train is passing through, they have no control, because that's interstate trade. That falls under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. That's the Commerce Clause, and that's a federal power. You're going to see in 1887, the Interstate Commerce Act is going to be passed. They're going to form the Interstate Commerce Commission, who is going to oversee interstate businesses in our country. And so the railroads are actually going to kind of win in the end, because they're going to work with state governments. They're going to keep lobbying state governments and start repealing some of the Grange laws. But we start to see the farmers, their voice starting to grow a little bit, if you will. That's going to lead to the Populist Party. Now, initially, the National Farmers Alliance, they had the Ocala demands. Now, the Ocala demands was based on their national convention that happened in Ocala, Florida. These are going to merge into the Omaha platform. The Omaha platform is the Populist Party platform in 1892, and you can see exactly right there the list what they were fighting for. Tariff reductions, because the tariffs cost the farmers a lot of money. It cost them more to get their goods than they would pay without the tariffs. They wanted a graduated income tax. They wanted the government to step in and take ownership of not only railroads, but grain storage and other places like that. They wanted more democracy, so we're going to see them asking for direct election of senators. They wanted here's one, ban on land ownership for aliens. They didn't want immigrants to be able to own land right away. They wanted the government to give them loans, to provide loans for the farmers, so they wouldn't have to deal with the banks. So what the Populist Party, also known as the People's Party, they're looking for more democracy, but they're also looking for more government involvement in their day-to-day lives. So they want both of those with regards to their Omaha platform. In 1892, they're actually going to put up their very first presidential candidate, and that's going to be James Weaver. He is actually going to get 8.5% of the popular vote, and we're going to also see that the Populist Party moves into a lot of state legislatures. I believe it was 8 states that are going to be under the populist control. They are going to get some power or get some seats in the House and the Senate. Not enough to have a voting power, but to have a presence. Yeah, Grover Cleveland paints the White House white. I don't know. There's some trivia for you. There's some. I got some more. I got another thing about the Panic of 1893. Just a little bit more information. Stock market crash because of the gold shortage. You're going to see foreign investors pull out. I remember talking to you about that in class. Agriculture. Anytime there's a depression, they get hit the hardest. Okay. That takes us to the election of 1896. William Jennings Bryan, who I already talked about, gives his Cross of Gold speech. William McKinley, who favored the gold standard, is going to be elected. He will win. 1900 gold standard will become our currency. We'll have the Gold Standard Act of 1900, and that will do that. All right, let me get out of this one. While I'm doing this is your opportunity. Do you have any questions for me while I'm switching over on slides or anything? Just let me know, and just start typing them in, because this is just going to take me just a minute to get all this. No, cancel. Alrighty. Okay. No questions for me, guys? Alright. Then we're going to press on. Let's see. Is it this one I want? Alright. So, let's talk more about the political response to the Gilded Age. You got to know this picture, guys. This is the picture of the trust and their relationship with the United States government. If you notice in this picture, and we did this when we did our station activity. You guys broke this down quite a bit. The things I want to point out. Notice the two doors. You have the Native American stuff. I'm gonna touch on briefly. Yeah, Quentin, don't worry. I'll circle back around to that. The entrance here is going to be for the monopolists, but notice on the left-hand side on the top of the picture, you can see a door that says People's Entrance, and that's been closed. This is going to be the argument that a lot of people have during this time, is that it's the monopolies, it's the corporations who are controlling American government, it's not the people. And that's really one big reason why the Populist Party was so involved in trying to get more democracy. So the people, we could get back to them feeling that the people were being heard and not just the corporations. Okay. I'm just skipping. Some of the other things that the Populist Party wanted. Philip, I'll answer that question here in just a second. Let me finish this slide, okay? With regards to the Populist Party, like I talked about, the Omaha platform, be familiar with that. For labor, remember, the Populist Party was not just farmers. They brought in a lot of union members too. So they're also fighting for an 8-hour workday. They're fighting for higher wages. They're fighting for immigration restrictions as well. So keep that in mind. All right, Philip, you said for studying, what should we focus on? And how much do we need to know about the presidents and what they did? The presidents... Remember, I thought I had a slide on here, and it might come up here in a little bit, but the presidents during the Gilded Age are known as the forgotten presidents. And the reason why they're forgotten is because they didn't do anything. I wouldn't focus directly on presidents, because I think you're going to, unless that helps you remember when things happen, I would focus on some of those Supreme Court cases I talked about. I would focus on the Populist Party. I would focus just on the effect or the relationship between industrialization and workers, and industrialization and the government. So I'm pretty much just recapping everything I've talked about, but I'm gonna say it, don't waste your time trying to remember every single president, because if they have the name the forgotten, that there's a reason for that. So the ones I would recommend, McKinley and Grant, maybe. I would be familiar with Hayes, just because of the Compromise of 1877. But I don't even remember specifically talking about presidencies in my class. I remember saying, while when Garfield got shot, Arthur became vice president, passed the Pendleton Act. That's the kind of stuff I remember. So that's kind of what I would do. Never forget Garfield. Oh, poor Garfield. All right. Let's talk a little bit about the changes in the South, because that's another big thing that's going on. After the Civil War and during Reconstruction, we had the cropland and sharecropping system. That's going to give way to Jim Crow. Now, I'm going to pause here for a second, because when you guys did your short answer for me, when we did, it was in the notebook. I've seen a lot. Is a notebook? I believe it's no. It was the short answer you guys did for me for the Gilded Age Station activity. A lot of you guys keep saying that one continuity during that system, it was going to be segregation. Segregation really, I mean, there was, I don't want to say there wasn't any, because there was, but segregation became part of Jim Crow. We had black codes during the Reconstruction era, and what that did was that limited the freedom of movement and stuff that black Americans had in the South. But Jim Crow worked to segregate, and then we'll see with Plessy versus Ferguson that Jim Crow becomes the law. And in Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal became the mainstay of our country until 1954, when Brown v. Board of Education is going to be passed. So that's what's happening in the South after Reconstruction, is we're shifting away from black codes, and now we're moving into Jim Crow. And Jim Crow was, like I said, about segregation and also about limiting the right to vote in the South for the African Americans. This is when you had this idea of this New South theory that came out. I'm not going to talk a lot about that, but there was basically a change in the teaching, I guess you will, or the view of the Civil War and why they initially fought in it. And that's when you start seeing the argument twisting around to states' rights and stuff like that, because you didn't want to say, well, it was because we wanted to keep slavery going, or we wanted to expand slavery. It was about states' rights. So this idea of the New South was the whole idea was trying to, I guess, save the image of the South, if you will. That's the best way I can put it. So you want to keep that in mind. Jim Crow is the voting restrictions. You would have literacy tests that you had to pass, which was what's interesting about the literacy test is I'd be willing to bet that the people running the polls probably couldn't pass the literacy test either. I mean, you can look at this right now and look at some of these questions from Alabama and tell me how many questions you can actually answer today. And, some of you might be able to do, but, for the most part, I'd be willing to bet that a lot of people, if I gave this to you in class, wouldn't be able to do many of these questions. And this was being handed to African Americans when they went to vote to prove that they were worthy. So that's one thing. Literacy test. Poll taxes. You might have to pay a tax in order to vote. So that was another thing they used. The grandfather clause. Again, if your grandfather voted in the election, you're allowed to vote in the election. But as you know, most of the freedmen now, their grandfathers were slaves. So, of course, they didn't vote in the election. You had different movements step up during this time. African Americans worked, fighting for the rights of African Americans in the country. On the left there at the top, you have Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington was of mind that the best way to get rights is through education. He kind of had he presented this perception of, do the best you can where you are in life right now and get an education to draw you out of, your situation. And I mean, that's what he did. And he's actually going to start the Tuskegee Institute and everything like that. So he's a huge civil rights leader during this time. W.E.B. Du Bois, there on the right, on the top, he's like, no, we're American citizens. We should get our rights now. It's not about if we get an education first. It's not about if we, live up to, what the white man wants us to be or anything like that. We need our rights now. And a lot of times when we talk about civil rights, you're going to see a slight comparison between Booker T. Washington and Martin Luther King and W.E.B. Du Bois and Malcolm X. There's obviously some flaws in that theory, but this is going on during the Gilded Age. Here we go into the far west. You know, we didn't talk a lot about this, but we see, you know, the rise of the Old West and boom towns, and, you know, the discovery of silver in Nevada. You know, before the railroad, we had the Pony Express, but then we got Morse code. That's another one of those inventions that came out during this time period. Cattle, we talked about, you know, how the cattle would, you know, was part of the rail industry, and you would drive your cattle to the rail cars to get them to meat packing plants like in Chicago and other places. All of this, I'm going to be honest with you, we didn't do a whole lot in my class. It just wasn't that, I don't put that right up there on the top of importance. But here we go. Native Americans, I do put at the top of importance. While the Civil War was going on, we're going to have several conflicts where we're going to go through what's known as the Plain Indians War. And the Plains Indian War basically went from about 1864 to 1890. This is going to, you know, we're going to be fighting two wars for 3 years while the Civil War is going on. One of the major events is going to be the Sand Creek Massacre, led by Colonel Chivington and his men, when they are going to invade a camp of Native Americans led by Red Cloud, who had just negotiated a peace with Abraham Lincoln. And yet Chivington and his men are going to raid the village. They're going to kill. They said that what they were doing is they were protecting local settlements because young braves from the Native American tribes were going out and, you know, attacking and stuff like that. So they raided the village and they shot and killed almost everyone there, and then they scalped them, and then they decided to take those scalps and parade them on the streets of Denver, Colorado to show off what they did. So that's the Sand Creek Massacre. Like I told you, Chivington and his men are going to be court-martialed. Not going to end up in jail or anything, but some will lose rank, and, you know, obviously we're still talking about the ruthlessness of Chivington today, so maybe that's his penance right now, is how he's remembered. So, the Treaty of Fort Laramie, 1868. This was supposed to be the treaty to end all treaties, when we basically set up land like the Dakota area and stuff like that for the Native Americans, saying we're not going to go there, and as long as the grass grows and the water runs, you will always have this land, and we're never going to take it away from you. Just pause and think about that for a moment. Okay. Sidebar, Fort Laramie, Wyoming. Just saying. Okay. Of course, then you're going to have the famous Battle of Little Bighorn. We talked in my class about the Fetterman Massacre. This is kind of a result or a retribution for the Fetterman Massacre, led by Colonel George Custer against Sitting Bull and the Sioux Nation. Custer and his men are going to be just completely destroyed. And for what's going to happen is American citizens, when they hear about that, they're going to want retribution. They're going to be calling for revenge. And for many years after this happened, this was painted as Custer and his men were brutally attacked and savagely beaten and everything, whereas it was just Custer's poor leadership that is going to lead them into that situation. What this is going to result in, though, is the Dakotas are going to be opened up to settlement. You're going to see the Sioux are going to lose more and more land over time. And basically, we're just, you know, we've been saying from the very beginning of time, our policy with regards to Native Americans is get out of our way. And once again, after the Battle of Little Bighorn, we're going to send more troops out there to try to capture Sitting Bull and the others. Crazy Horse, I believe, was there as well. And so the end is near for the Native Americans. The one who holds on the longest is going to be Geronimo. That's going to be the Apache Wars that are going on down in the New Mexico region. Look at that, 1849 to 1886. And we weren't able to capture them because they were fighting. Do I have a picture of it? I don't. They were fighting in the Dragoon Mountains down there in New Mexico, or in Arizona, which gave them a natural fort. And so it took us quite a while to capture Geronimo, but they were the last tribe to give any armed resistance to us. 1887, the Dawes Act. My brother is sending me text messages. I'm sorry. 1887, the Dawes Act is going to basically end the reservation system, particularly in Oklahoma. And what that's going to do is we're going to take the Native American land, divide it up into parcels of land. I think 160 acres or something like that. We're actually going to give that land to Native American families for them to farm, kind of like under the same rules of the Homestead Act, but they have to keep the land longer. And then the rest of the land from the Dawes Act we're going to give to American settlers. So it was just basically another way for the federal government to get more land from the Native Americans. But the Dawes Act does end the reservation system in our country. What else do I have here? You don't need to know this, but Native Americans are not going to really get any recognition until 1934 during the New Deal era, when FDR is going to pass legislation on their behalf. But that's coming later. That's just in there. One thing you do need to know about the Native Americans: Helen Hunt Jackson will be a muckraker who is going to write a book called A Century of Dishonor. What's going to chronicle the abuses of how we have been treating the Native Americans from the first year, or from the beginning of time. So make sure you know Helen Hunt Jackson's name and know what she wrote. I'm sorry, I'm texting my brother back. So sorry, family, okay, and live TV. All right, Wounded Knee Massacre is going to mark the end of the Native American Wars. This is going to happen up in the Dakotas. And it's going to be basically the last armed conflict between the U.S. Army and the Native Americans. And when I say conflict, it really wasn't. It was one of those situations where a gun went off and the military started firing upon innocent women, children, and older men. And this will be kind of the end of the Plains Indian War. It marks the end of that. So be familiar with the Wounded Knee Massacre. And this will be the end of basically the West in America, the wilderness of the West, the frontier closing down. Once the Plains Indian Wars have ended, we basically controlled all the land, so the frontier has officially closed, as you can see here from Frederick Jackson Turner. And I showed you this slide in class. The end of Manifest Destiny was brought to an end with homesteads and railroads, warfare with the Native Americans, and our Manifest Destiny was finally complete. So that was the western part of the Gilded Age. All right. Woo! Here's a slide that basically breaks down everything from the Gilded Age that you should be familiar with. Philip, when you want to know what should I study, what just happened here? Basically, here's some key ideas. Be familiar with Grant's presidency, primarily the conflicts and the corruption that was going on during his presidency. Compromise of 1877, which ends Reconstruction. The Industrial Age. Be familiar with the robber barons, the capitalists, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, the Morgans. Know those names. The rise of unions and what their role was during this time. Know the different unions: Knights of Labor, AFL, IWW. Be familiar with the new immigrants and what they brought with them and where they settled. And like we said earlier, they settled primarily in the cities, which is going to lead to urbanization. I talked about a few muckrakers. There's a few more that we can touch on, but be familiar with what their job was. The muckrakers were journalists trying to shed light on the corruption and filth of the Gilded Age, and that they're going to bring a lot of reform because of their work. The Populist era. This is a whole new political party that's going to basically change politics in America and change government, because a lot of those ideas that you saw on the Omaha platform exist today. So, we have that. Civil rights. We, look at Plessy v. Ferguson. Be familiar, be familiar with the names of Booker T. Washington and W.B. Du Bois. What goes on in the far west, what I just talked about, in the American Indians. Spanish-American War, do not worry about that. If you're copying this down, do not copy that down, because that is our next unit. Okay, so stop right now. Don't do anymore. All right. I want to talk a little bit about the Progressive era, and I want to talk about the presidencies of TR and Taft and Wilson. I don't have slides to go with that, so let me get over here. You guys are going to have to stare at my face, and I'm sorry about that, but here we go. So going into the 1900s. The 1900s is known as the Progressive Era, and a lot of things are going to change in America during this roughly, 16, 17-year time period. We're going to see amendments being passed. We're going to see reforms being passed. And we're going to see new ideas with regards to the economy of our country. Now, what you need to be familiar with, honestly, is going into, or which piece of legislation replaced the Sherman Antitrust Act. That's going to be the Clayton Antitrust Act. And what that does is that basically strengthens, they kind of work in tandem together, but the Clayton Antitrust Act is going to come in to take control there. The presidency of Teddy Roosevelt is going to be the result of McKinley being assassinated. Tecumseh's curse coming to life right there. McKinley's assassinated. TR takes over. He's going to come in. He's going to play a key role dealing with unions. He's going to step in on the anthracite coal mine strike and basically get them to come to an agreement. And so he's going to kind of show how the federal government can get involved with strikes without sending in federal troops. You're going to see him, what they call the square deal, coming out of those negotiations, out of that collective bargaining. And the square deal is going to become part of his economic plan. And what TR is going to look to do is he wants to control the corporations in our country. He wants to conservation. He wants to have, conserve our natural resources. And why am I drawing a blank? Oh my gosh, it's corporations. Oh, and consumerism. He wants to pass laws to protect his consumers. Now, this one reason he does this is another muckraker by the name of Upton Sinclair is going to write a book called The Jungle. Jungle's all about the nastiness of the meatpacking industry and all the gross stuff that goes on there. This is going to lead to the Meat Inspection Act and the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, passed under Teddy Roosevelt. When it comes to controlling the trust, TR struggled with what was a good trust and what was a bad trust. He didn't think monopolies were bad. He just thought that because as long as they were beneficial to the American people, he was, willing to allow a monopoly to stick around. But if not, he was going to basically bust it. That's why he's known as the trust buster. One of the first, or the first trust he's going to break up is Northern Securities Company, which was held primarily by J.P. Morgan, but Rockefeller had an interest in it as well. He's going to break that one up into smaller companies. During his presidency, TR is going to bust up 44 different trusts. When it comes to conservation, he's going to set aside lands, for national parks and national forests. And those lands still exist today. And so, honestly, that all got started when he visited Yellowstone National Park. He visited Yellowstone before, it became a national park and said, we got to preserve all this. So, consumerism, he passed laws. Corporations, he broke up some trusts using the Sherman Antitrust Act and the Clayton Antitrust Act. And then conservation, set aside lands for, for national parks and forests. He is going to choose William Howard Taft to be his successor. Taft will run successfully and win the presidency in 1908. He will serve as president for 4 years. During his presidency, he is going to bust 75 trusts. But what we're going to find with Taft is he's a much more conservative Republican, whereas TR was a progressive Republican. And so Taft is not going to go with the flair and the excitement of TR, but he is going to continue some of his ideas, but not all of them. And what we're going to see is one of the biggest things that's going to upset TR is that what's called the Gifford Ballinger affair. And thought it was 90. Maybe it was 90. I don't know. It was way more than TR. Gifford Pinchot was the conservationist that TR had put in his administration, who was helping him set up all these parks and everything. And Ballinger is going to come in under the Taft administration and take some of those lands set aside and give them to corporations to use for oil drilling and stuff like that in Wyoming, in Montana, I believe in Alaska, maybe Idaho, different areas. Pinchot is going to go out in public and publicly criticize Ballinger. And in doing so, criticizes President Taft. Taft will fire Pinchot, and that is going to lead TR to say, you're not doing what I chose you to do. You were my successor. You were supposed to carry on my policies. So I'm going to run for president again. The Republican Party will fail to nominate Teddy Roosevelt because most of the Republicans in the government at this time were mostly conservative, and they really don't want TR to come back in and instigate his bully pulpit where he's going to go out to the American public and sell his ideas. So they don't want TR to come back. They renominate Taft to run for president in 1912. TR not going to take it sitting down. He's going to form his own party. He's going to form the Progressive Party, nicknamed the Bull Moose Party. And he and Taft will run against Democrat Woodrow Wilson. Well, you have a progressive Republican with TR, you have a conservative Republican with Taft, and they basically split the vote. And in splitting the vote, they give the presidency to Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson is going to come in with his new economic plan called New Freedom, and he is going to be focused on the economics of America for his first term in office. He's actually going to serve 2 terms. And, he was planning on building more off of his economy going into 1916. Unfortunately, after he got reelected, America got pulled into World War I, which is the next unit. There we go. An hour and 10 minutes. I got through a lot of it. It wasn't pretty at times. But now, I don't know how many of you guys are even still online. I still got 24 of you viewing, so I didn't do too bad. But do you have questions for me? Because this is the time I want, I want to give you 10, 15 minutes if I have to. Ask any questions you have about this time period. I don't know. I'm sure I left stuff out because, 6 weeks and an hour and a half, we don't get it all covered. But just let me know if you have any questions, and I'll sit here for a few minutes. Let's see. No questions. Really? I'll just kind of, I don't want to shut it off too early because what are the major pieces of economic legislation that you should know? I would be familiar with the Bland-Allison Act. I'd be familiar with, economically, I'd be familiar with the Panic of 1893 and what led to that, and obviously bimetallism, be familiar with that. There's nothing, I don't think, off the top of my head, Rachel, I can't think of anything else major you should know other than those. Diplomatic relations with other countries during the Gilded Age. Riley, we're going to talk about that in our next unit. I really chose it. The course flows much better if we do Gilded Age, Progressive Era domestically, and then we go into foreign relations. So when we come back next week, we're going to talk about America in the world and all that stuff. Were the rights of immigrants equal to ordinary citizens? Yes, when they became citizens, and it was a pretty, especially with the political machines, they fast-tracked immigrants towards citizenship because remember they wanted their votes, and yeah, they had the same rights as American citizens. Now nativists are going to try to prevent that. You're going to see them try to pass laws against immigrants. We saw that kind of with the populist platform with regards to land ownership and stuff like that. But absolutely, once they became citizens, they did have the same rights. So, what else? A couple good questions there. It's always uncomfortable just to sit in silence, but I will. Nothing, guys? I don't see anything else coming in. All right, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and bring this to an end. I don't know what else to even talk about at this point. I will be up for another 15-20 minutes, so if you do have questions, you can text them to me. I appreciate you guys sticking with me and watching it. This is not the easiest unit because there is so much information. The Grange Party in more detail. Philip, the Grange Party, wait, okay, I'll do the Grange Party, and Becca, I just covered Native Americans with regards to Sand Creek Massacre and Wounded Knee and Battle of Little Bighorn. Yeah, I know you're coming from confirmation class, but, you know, it's in there. Trust me. It's all in there. Philip, the Grange Party. The Grange Party, basically, when it wasn't really a party. It was the Grange is what it was. And it was an alliance, if you will. It was a cooperation, a co-op between farmers. And what they did is it started as a social group. And, you know, so all these farmers used to come together and Quentin, no. Don't worry about Hawaii and Puerto Rico. But back to the Grange. They started as a social organization. They'd come together because farmers lived out on large pieces of land, so they'd see people a lot. So they started to come together for social gatherings. Then they're going to start talking about the oh my gosh, Becca, SAT. I'm sorry, I can't keep track of all the things you guys are involved in. My bad. SAT prep. They start talking about the prices they're paying for their, you know, they're getting paid for their goods, and they're realizing that they're getting lowballed on their prices. So what happens is the Grange is going to start moving in towards more of an economic cooperative, where they say, you know what, maybe if instead of me trying to sell my corn on my own, what if I, you know, buddy up with all the farmers in our county and we sell it as one big unit? And in doing so, there's not going to be competition against, you know, for our grain. And so the buyers will have to pay a higher price. And then we can just divide it up that way. And so that's kind of how the Grange got started. Now, they're going to be pushing for bimetallism. They're going to be pushing, you know, for some of the smaller things that we see when the National Farmers Alliance forms up out of that. But so the Grange, you're going from more of a regional style of cooperative. Now, they will have a national organization, but it won't have much power. That's not going to happen until you see the National Farmers Alliance come together. And the National Farmers Alliance is going to take those economic goals of the Grange and add some political goals to it as well. And they'll have what's known as the Ocala Conference. And the Ocala Conference, they're going to write their Ocala demands, which, you know, bimetallism, federally funded grain storage, federally funded railroads, stuff like that. And then what will happen is as the National Farmers Alliance grows, that's going to evolve into the Populist Party. So hopefully that answers your question. It's kind of, you know, the Grange, the National Farmers Alliance, the Populist Party, all related to one another because you really can't have one without the other. Okay? So, Rebecca, basically, I know you weren't there, so basically I just talked about the major Native American events, and I said like Sand Creek Massacre, Little Bighorn, and Wounded Knee. You know, those are the big ones you need to be familiar with. So if you do that, you'll be fine. So anything else, ladies and gentlemen? Okay. I think, what are some of the important court cases you think we should know? Well, I went over those. Munn v. Illinois, Wabash v. Illinois, Plessy v. Ferguson. Philip, should you watch the Wizards of Oz for the test? Nah. You don't need to watch the and it's just wizard. It's just one wizard. But you know what? If you have the breakdown of who everybody was, that's one way to help you remember who all the big characters are during the Gilded Age. Honestly, you know, William Bryan, Cowardly Lion, you know, the Scarecrow, the Populist Party, the Tin Man, the Industrialist, you know. So, can you see the doggos? Yeah, I can probably get Flynn over here. Gilligan will still not come behind the desk. So, if you guys don't have any more questions, I'll get Gilligan over here, or Flynn over here, and see what he can do. Gilligan, Oh, he's chewing on something else now. Anyway, come here, Flynn. Come here. Let me see if I can get him up here in the screen. Get up here. Come on, get up. Come here. Come on. You won't get up. You won't. Get up here. Right. Oh, see, I picked up the ball, and now he wants me to throw it. So I'll throw it once and try to get him to come back over here. Let's see. No, let me get over here so I can get. Come here, get up here. Come here, buddo. Come here, buddy. All right, there he is. Okay, here's Flynn. Say hello, Flynn. Say hello, Flinny. Hello, he's got his soccer ball. Oh, yes. Such a good boy. Yes, you're a good boy. You're gonna give him luck for the test tomorrow? So don't stay up studying too late. Just review. You'll do fine. Okay? All right, if there's nothing else, guys, we're gonna say goodnight. I gotta go out and throw the ball a little bit for him before it gets too cold, because there's no way I'm walking him at 4 o'clock tomorrow morning when it's supposed to be like 30-something degrees. So we're gonna get our exercise tonight. So it's always my pleasure to review. I hope it helps you guys out. Again, I'll be up for a little bit longer. I'll probably catch the end of the State of the Union address. So you guys have a fantastic evening, and we will see you tomorrow. All right. Bye-bye.